Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded feedback event for the March 2014 examination for Unit 7 EO2 Anatomy and Physiology for Sport. To help you get the most out of this feedback, you may want to have the following documents handy, as we will refer to them during the session. Here are the aims and objectives of today's session. You will receive feedback on performance of learners of the March 2014 EO2 examination. Consider questions where significant numbers of learners underperformed and possible reasons why. Discuss the principal examiner's report. Consider delivery strategies and share good practice. Address common issues. Find out about further support available. I'm now going to introduce you to the assessment. Please open the Unit 7 specification document. As you can see, the unit is split into two learning aims. The March 2014 paper addressed Learning Aim A and B. The questions within the paper were spread across Level 1 and Level 2, Pass, Merit and Distinction. The next 5 slides will look at questions where learners did well. Question 1. This question is a straightforward multiple choice. Most learners were able to answer this question correctly and are generally able to identify the major muscles of the body. Answer: deltoids. Question 2. This question is a straightforward multiple choice. Most learners were able to answer this question correctly by identifying the aorta and vena cava as structures of the cardiovascular system. The distractors were structures in the respiratory systems, and most learners were able to differentiate between structures of the two systems. Answer: aorta and vena cava. Question 3. This question is a straightforward multiple choice. Both parts of this question were answered well. Learners seemed confident in recognizing the type and location of the bone. Answer: long and arm. Question 4. This question is a straightforward multiple choice. This question was challenging for learners. Some learners could identify cartilage. It may be that it becomes more difficult to identify in this context, where there is more information for the learners to process. Or it may be that learners are not familiar with this image of a joint or the terminology used. Answers: cartilage and synovial fluid. Question 5a. This question is a straightforward multiple choice. Most learners were able to identify the alveoli and the epiglottis. Answer: epiglottis. Question 5b. Learners did well in this question and identified the diaphragm straightens, flattens, contracts, moves downwards, to allow air, oxygen, to flow into the lungs, or to decrease air pressure in the lungs, or produces a vacuum effect to suck air into the lungs. This slide shows a summary of how learners performed on this question. Question 6. This question is a straightforward multiple choice. Most learners are able to identify the bones of the skeleton and label them correctly. In this question, some learners did get confused between the clavicle and scapula and the tibia and femur. Answer: clavicle, sternum, and tibia. Question 7. This question is a straightforward multiple choice. Learners found this question challenging. While most learners are familiar with the types of muscle and their location, fewer learners were able to make the link that skeletal muscles are voluntary. Thus, we are effectively looking for two features of skeletal voluntary muscle in this question. Answer: attach to the skeleton and produce body movement. Question 8. Learners did well in this question and identified any three of mechanics of breathing inspiration, expiration, taking up oxygen, air into the body, or taking carbon dioxide out of the body, gaseous exchange, thermoregulation, fighting infection, stopping bleeding after injury, provides cells with nutrients, transports hormones, pumps blood, oxygen, oxygenated blood, deoxygenated blood around the body to the heart, lungs, removes waste products, lactic acid from the body. This slide shows how a summary of how learners performed on this question. Question 9. This question is a straightforward multiple choice. 9a. Very few learners accessed full marks here. Many knew that there are 12 pairs of ribs. 9b. Very few learners were able to identify the top 7 pairs as true ribs. Answers: 9a, 12 and 9b. True. Question 10. This question is a straightforward multiple choice. Most learners can identify the different types of joints. However, this question made them take a second step to apply this knowledge to specific parts of the body which they found more difficult. More learners were able to match the hinge joint to the knee than were able to match the saddle joint to the thumb. Answers: thumb and knee. Activity 1. This is a learner's response to question 11. Pause the recording and look at the example. Using the mark scheme, decide what mark you think should be awarded and why. This is the learner's response to question 11 with an explanation of how the marks were awarded. This slide shows how a summary of how learners performed on this question. Question 12. This is a straightforward labelling question. The question was answered well, showing that learners have a good knowledge of joints. The name of the joint, ankle, shoulder, was accepted as a correct response, as well as the type of joint, ankle, hinge or condyloid, shoulder, gliding. Question 13a. The slide shows an example of why learners accessed marks on question 13a. This slide shows an example of how learners failed to access marks on question 13a. This slide shows how a summary of how learners performed on this question. Question 13b. The slide shows an example of why learners accessed marks on question 13b. This slide shows how a summary of how learners performed on this question. Question 14a and b. This slide shows an example of how learners failed to access marks on question 14a and b. This slide shows how a summary of how learners performed on this question. Question 15. This slide shows an example of how learners failed to access marks on question 15. This slide shows how a summary of how learners performed on this question. Activity 2. This is a learner's response to question 16a. Pause the recording and look at the example. Using the mark scheme, decide what mark you think should be awarded and why. This is the learner's response to question 16a with an explanation of how the marks were awarded. This is a learner's response to question 16b. Pause the recording and look at the example. Using the mark scheme, decide what mark you think should be awarded and why. This is the learner's response to question 16b with an explanation of how the marks were awarded. This slide shows how a summary of how learners performed on this question. Activity 3. This is a learner's response to question 17. Pause the recording and look at the example. Using the mark scheme, decide what mark you think should be awarded and why. This is the learner's response to question 17 with an explanation of how the marks were awarded. This slide shows an example of how learners failed to access marks on question 17. This is the learner's response to question 17 with an explanation of how the marks were awarded. This slide shows how a summary of how learners performed on this question. Delegates are now asked to pause to read the principal examiner's report. Please note that all the questions on the paper have been commented on in the principal examiner's report. This is another resource for you to use to help understand the requirements of each question and to see what sort of responses were given by learners and how they were awarded marks. Some of the information from it has been used in this presentation, and if you are able to spend some time reading it, I am sure it will help you gain further understanding. The report can be given to learners so they can see for themselves what is required for the different types of questions and how they can be awarded marks. Please note that this part of the presentation is dealing with the delivery of the qualification rather than the exam. I would now like you to consider delivery strategies and best practice. 1. Practical-based learning sessions, using role-play for example. 2. Mapping integrating units across the centre. Although this can be an arduous task, it is proven to be beneficial in many centres. 3. Scenarios, contexts. Use these so learners get an idea of the different vocational scenarios. 4. Use of delivery guide. It is a useful document, but concentrate on each section of the specification. Use learner experience where possible and appropriate. 5. Group work. Learners can help each other understand topics. 6. Research. Look at the how and why rather than just using. 7. Projects. 8. Exam techniques. Use this presentation and the lead examiner report to explain to learners the different exam techniques, especially where they might not be obvious when looking at a question such as explain. 1 mark for identification, 2nd mark for justification or expansion. 9. Enter learners when they are fully prepared so they will be able to achieve the best mark possible. Question 18. This slide shows an example of how learners failed to access marks on question 18. This slide shows how a summary of how learners performed on this question. Common issues during this examination series were: a common mistake made by learners when they're discussing antagonistic pairs, such as the biceps and triceps, is that they think if the biceps muscle is contracting concentrically, then the triceps are contracting eccentrically when they are actually not contracting, staying relaxed, to allow the joint movement to occur. Most of these types of question involve the analysis of training movements from the gym, rather than sports movements. To help to prepare learners for this question and to improve learner achievement, it is good practice to have learners take part in a variety of sporting movements with specific joints to analyse so that they're able to apply their knowledge to this question. This slide includes detail of where further support is available. This is the key web page for customers to be aware of, for support and guidance with BTEC results. For further guidance and support with the delivery and assessment of BTEC, see our full training offer here: www.btec.co.uk/training. Any further questions to be directed to the Subject Advisor for Sport, Penny Lewis. We constantly look to improve the delivery of our training and appreciate all delegate feedback. You will soon receive an email directing you to our online feedback form. The form takes no more than a couple of minutes to complete. Please let us know your thoughts by filling in this short form. All those who complete the online form will be able to enter themselves in the prize draw, with a chance of winning a £100 Amazon.co.uk gift card. There will be one winner drawn every 3 months from those who entered during the preceding 3 months.